Hello and welcome to the Philippines. If you landed on another planet with intelligent life, chances are you would want to find out about the people, the culture, the social structure, the language, the religion, in order to communicate with them. Anyway, the same is, of course, true if you go to another country, another part of the world. Sometimes it's true in your own country. You go to a different part of different state, a different region, and you'll find different groups of people there with different customs. The food's a little different, the language, lingo is a little different, and it's going to take you some time to learn about that. If you're going to date a foreigner, both of you are going to have to adapt and have some understanding of the other person's culture. I'm going to go over several different aspects of cultures, how they think, how they do things, and I think you're going to find it quite interesting. Many of us from Western cultures think differently, do things differently, have different values than many of the people in Asian countries, for instance, African countries, some of the European countries as well. Many of us from the West cultures are very independent, individualistic, and we make decisions based on what we think is best for us. We often don't give a lot of weight to how it will affect other people, although if close family, of course, you think about those things. If you have children, if you're going to move, if you're going to change jobs. But much more so in Asian countries and Latin countries, for instance, is much more of a group mentality, a collectivism. They will go out and they will seek advice from parents, cousins, aunts, uncles, and friends. In the Philippines, for instance, about 10% of the population works overseas, and most of those people send money home to their families. They even help their nephews and nieces go to school and colleges. It's a long-standing commitment to family. If you're going to date a Filipino, it's best to have an understanding about that as you get into a serious relationship. How much you're going to send, if you're going to send it, who you're going to send it to. They also like to do things in groups. I can travel by myself just fine, and what I found, I've had groups of people a number of times in the almost 3 years I've been here in the Philippines invite me along, and it's a group adventure, and it makes things it can make things a little more complicated, obviously, because not everybody wants to do the same things, not everybody wants to go to the same place to eat the same types of foods, so it can be a fun experience, an adventure, but it can also make things a little more complicated and uncomfortable, depending on who you're with, of course. Time orientation is another cultural difference in many nations of the world. In many of the Western nations in particular, if you have an appointment, you're expected to be at the appointment on time or early. Here in the Philippines and some of the Latin nations and other nations of the world, here in the Philippines, we call it Philippine Time. In fact, I've heard the story many times that if you show up at somebody's house at, let's say, 7 p.m. for a dinner engagement or a party, they will ask, oh, why are you here so early? It's much more common to show up 30 minutes to an hour late, and they call it Philippine Time here. I've been told by some Filipinos that they've been taught that when dealing with Western companies and, for instance, their work environment at the call centers, that type of thing, that they understand there are different rules than there are in many parts of the Philippines. Many cultures understand that things can happen. There's traffic you can't always account for. There are family issues, whatever. And that the meeting will start when everybody arrives who needs to be at the meeting. So that's going to be something you're going to have to get used to, depending upon the people that you're around. Being versus doing. Many of the Western nations are more on the doing type of culture, getting things done, having schedules, having checklists. And many Asian nations, although Japan is more of a doing culture, many Asian cultures and Latin cultures and African cultures are more of a being, experiencing the day and combining life experiences with work, bringing their work, their personal experiences into the workplace. I've heard many times in Western cultures, businesses that I've been involved in, that you should leave your personal issues at home. You're here to work, and that's all you're supposed to do. Other countries, it's acceptable and it's understandable that their personal lives are part of their lives, and if they're at work, that doesn't change that. Being cultures tend to be less stressful because they're paying more attention just to life each day, living the life. When I landed in the Philippines the second time, it's like the stress from being back in the U.S. just lifted off my shoulders, and it was I've heard that from many people. It's like, oh, just the friendliness, the culture that is more free and less restrictive. Expressiveness in a culture can be neutral or affective. Countries that tend to be neutral, like Japan, the UK, Sweden, Germany, many of the Asian countries, and then the affective, which basically is how your feelings, how your attitude affects how you're going to act. And generally you will see more facial expressions. Italy, probably the number one there. Poland, France, many of the Latin countries, much more expressive. The neutral countries, cultures, generally it's less acceptable to interrupt when somebody else is speaking. The affective cultures, it is more acceptable to interrupt. And there again, the Italians are probably king there, with many people speaking at the same time. I know a couple of Italian families, and it is just a chorus as everybody is discussing several different topics at the same time. In many countries, especially Asian countries, including the Philippines, saving face is a major part of the culture. Confrontation is frowned upon, especially if it's in public. If you embarrass somebody in public, the discussion, the negotiation will probably go downhill very quickly from there. You may have gotten something in the negotiations prior to that, but if you embarrass somebody, and I know a guy at a hotel who was trying to get a refund, and he made a statement to me that probably because I confronted them and I was a little bit angry, I probably never got that refund. And I've had another guy tell me that he took my advice, and he had a similar situation with a hotel, and he kind of backed off and cooled down and was nice, smiled, and he ended up getting his refund. Confrontation, especially in the Philippines, will just get you in possibly serious trouble. So I suggest you learn how to negotiate, learn how to smile. Filipinos are very good at smiling, but that doesn't mean they're always happy with the situation. The silent treatment is a worldwide phenomenon, but here in the Philippines it's called Tampo, to sulk, or the silent treatment. If they're unhappy with something that you've done, that you've said, that you've looked at another boy or you've looked at another girl, they may sulk for a few hours or a few days. And that's part of the culture around the world, really. Here it's called Tampo in the Philippines. Your boyfriend or girlfriend might come from a competitive or a cooperative type culture. And this has some overlap with individualism versus collectivism, but you constantly see Filipinos, for instance, one of the cultures where cooperation is constantly being pushed in company meetings, that type of thing. And they have lots and lots of team building events. This was a case where a couple companies brought their employees out to a beach on Mactan Island, and the whole day was spent pretty much team building type exercises. And it's very common here in the Philippines, many other Asian nations. Team building I've been involved in the USA was all work related at work, and consisted of trying to be more efficient. What the heck is that, and how does it affect relationships? Particularism versus universalism. Universalism basically is the same rules for everything. Everything is black or white. It's rule based. Contracts are upheld exactly how they're written. Particularism understands that there may be special cultural values, relationships, special circumstances, unique variables. There may be limited competence or bias of the legal system, and judges often rely on precedent, past law, past sentences, and make subjective determinations in deciding the course of the particular problem. The cultures of this type may feel that it's much more acceptable to tell white lies or not tell the truth in court proceedings, for instance. And the same would go in their relationships with their employers and possibly their families as well, that it's often might be easier to tell that white lie because the powers to be might be biased, or the system itself might not be competent. If you're going to date somebody from another culture, it's important to understand their values and their experiences through life. And you're both going to have to adapt a little bit to those values or understand them wherever you are in the world. And they're great rewards. A lot you can learn from dating a foreigner, obviously. And you just need to put all the pieces together. I've seen many foreigners come here to the Philippines, and they found the right one very quickly, got married very quickly, and I've met them a couple of years later, and they seem to have a great relationship. And I certainly wish the best to all of you. There's also stories where people just didn't adapt. They just didn't understand the cultures, didn't get along at all. So it's a good idea to have some knowledge of the situation, to have a plan B and plan C, and certainly hope for the best and put your energies into making things work out. Some of this information was taken from a book called Customs of the World from audible.com, one of the biggest online downloadable book libraries in the world. And I think I get 2 books a month for about $22, I believe. Anyway, thank you for watching, and please subscribe, please share the video, and safe travels to you all. We'll see you next time.